can also enter into the cemetery for processions as well. So 4 points into the cemetery for funeral processions. Now coming up on the passenger side, that orange arch is the McClellan Gate, the last of the 4 original entrances to Arlington National Cemetery, named after Civil War General George McClellan, who Abraham Lincoln hired twice, and who Abraham Lincoln fired twice. Liked him that much. Now the gate is made out of the same red sandstone that they used to make the castle at the Smithsonian. And if you notice the left column in gold lettering, there's a name, Beggs. That's for Montgomery Beggs. Not only did he design that gate, but he's the founder of Arlington National Cemetery. And there are several structures within the cemetery that he designed that you'll see as we go through the door. Now notice the markers on the passenger side standing at attention like a soldier. Perfect formation every direction you look. Each marker, 42 inches high, 24 inches above ground. 13 inches across, 4 inches thick. Weigh 230 pounds, made of Vermont marble. Now each one of these markers is government issued. Now section 60 here on the driver's side. Now this is where we have the majority of our service members that served in Iraq and Afghanistan buried here. And near the back of the section, around where the columbarium is, we have a final resting place for General Colin Powell, passenger side. Notice the various shapes and sizes. Now any marker that's different than the standard government-issued marker is privately funded, either through family or private foundation. And since 2017, private markers are no longer allowed here at the cemetery. For space considerations, the only markers now allowed are the standard government-issued markers. Now coming up on the driver's side, watch the second row. In gold lettering, you'll see one of the over 400 Medal of Honor recipients here at Arlington National Cemetery. Final resting place for Medal of Honor recipient Henry Johnson, member of the 369th Infantry Division, also known as the Harlem Hellfighters. Second cylinder on the driver's side coming up in gold lettering. Held off a German raid, got wounded 21 times, and for his heroism during World War I became the first American ever to be awarded France's highest military honor, the Cross of War. Now coming up on the passenger side, Octagon Memorial for the greatest disaster in the Coast Guard's history, the USS Serpens. USS Serpens was an ammunition ship, exploded off of Guadalcanal during World War II. 250 service members lost their lives, and all their names were engraved around the Octagon Memorial there on the passenger side. Now notice the larger markers with more than one name on them. Now these are all for service members who all died together in one incident, such as a plane crash, shipwreck, helicopter crash, that sort of situation. So our first stop, the General John J. Blackjack Pershing gravesite. Now General John J. Blackjack Pershing is the highest ranking military official in the cemetery, second only to the president. In 1919, he was awarded the rank General of the Armies, the equivalent of a 6-star general, command of all the armed forces. Only other person ever awarded that rank wasn't even given it until over 200 years after his death. And that's George Washington. Now on the hill on the passenger side have the final resting place for General Henry F. Arnold, 5-star general in the Army and 5-star general in the Air Force, instructed and flying by the Wright brothers. Also on the passenger side, final resting place for Corporal Tram Buckles, the last American World War I veteran, died at the age of 110. Also on the hill, final resting place for Corporal Albert Hayes, one of the Marines that raised the second flag on Mount Suribachi at the Battle of Iwo Jima. So on the pasture side, this clearing, there's a wilting tree. On the right of the wilting tree, a single government-issued marker. That marker, the final resting place for General John J. Blackjack Pershing. And notice, you've seen all these elaborate marks at the cemetery. You have the highest ranking military official in the cemetery. cemetery next to the president, final resting place, a single government-issued marker, like all the other men he commanded. And this is our stop for General Pershing. Anyone who wants to get up, now the tram will be here in 20 minutes. Next stop will be the tomb of the unknown soldier. All right, going on to the tomb. Now, General Pershing commanded the American Expeditionary Forces during World War I. Many of those service members buried on the driver's side here in Section 18. Now, among the service members buried over there in Section 18 have the final resting place for Sergeant Edward Younger. Sergeant Edward Younger was the World War I soldier that was chosen to select the World War I unknown soldier that now arrested the Memorial Amphitheater. And as of this past November, this past Veterans Day, that World War I unknown soldier has now been here at Arlington National Cemetery for over 100 years. Now on the driver's side have the final resting place for Judge Ivory Kibble. Now Judge Ivory Kibble was the Civil War veteran that campaigned Congress to build the Memorial Amphitheater that we're going to. Wanted a more elaborate place for our service members to gather and celebrate together. Was there for the groundbreaking of the building, but unfortunately died before the building was completed. So at the tomb, there's more than one unknown soldier buried there. There's an unknown soldier for World War I, an unknown soldier for World War II, and an unknown soldier for the Korean War. Now there was an unknown soldier for the Vietnam War, but he was later identified. So since then, that tomb remains empty in memory of all our missing Vietnam service members. Now the tomb's guarded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year in all weather conditions, by the whole guard, 3rd U.S. Army Infantry Regiment, and they've been guarding the unknown soldier since 1948. Top of the hill on the driver's side, one of the two mausoleums here in Arlington. Mausoleum on the hill for Medal of Honor recipient, Major General Nelson A. Miles. Now, Major General Nelson A. Miles actually had the president in his prison. The president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, ended up in his prison, Fort Monroe, Virginia. Now, notice the markers on the driver's side, how much closer they are together, how they all say in memory of. Now, there's no remains buried under these markers. These are all for service members who were missing in action or buried at sea. Notice the second from the end there for Paul Ray Smith. First Medal of Honor recipient in Operation Iraqi Freedom had his ashes scattered over the Gulf of Mexico where he loved to fish. Passenger side, Section 35, have the final resting place for Senator John Glenn, one of the Mercury astronauts. Senator Glenn, first American ever to orbit the Earth. So almost at the tomb when we get there, put your cell phones on silent, photography's allowed. Just don't flash photography, and follow the instructions of the tomb sentinels there. Coming up on the driver's side, this is the nurses section of Arlington National Cemetery. Nurses from the Spanish-American War onward. Spanish-American War was the first war where they actually created a nurse corps. On the hill on the driver's side, this is the memorial for the Spanish-American War. Now these are naval cannons. Green cannons were the Spanish cannons. Black cannons were the American cannons. Which tells you all you need to know how we won that war. Coming up on the driver's side, large tree with a walkway around it and a chain link fence. And the corner of the chain link fence, government marker for the most decorated enlisted man in World War II, Audie Murphy. So we're coming to our stop at the tomb. Changing of the guard ceremony takes place at 1 o'clock, plenty of time. Now this is important, everybody pay attention. We do not pick you up here. Don't come over here to get picked up. Go straight ahead.
This is in front of the Eternal Flame of President John F. Kennedy. Died November 22nd, 1963. Arlington National Cemetery, Arlington, Virginia. This is the Eternal Flame lit for President John F. Kennedy. Passed away November 22nd, 1963. And his son, Patrick. This is Patrick. This is John F. Kennedy. This is the Eternal Flame. I hear it's only gone out twice. Once was a hurricane, and once was a overzealous group of nuns. That was, I don't know how it went out, but that's what I hear, the reason. This is Jacqueline Kennedy, right next to John F. Kennedy. And I believe this is the headstone for their daughter. I think she was stillborn, but I'm not sure.
I don't know.
But this is the Eternal Flame at Arlington National Cemetery for John F. Kennedy.
Protector from all enemies, foreign and domestic. As you look on the other side of that marker, you see the 4 stars of a general and the insignia of the United States Air Force for 4-star Air Force General Daniel Chaffee James Jr., a fighter pilot who began his military career serving during World War II in the 99th Pursuit Squadron. That squadron had the responsibility of getting the bomber pilots through the air fight that would inevitably be going on to keep those bombs from being dropped. During their tour of duty, the 99th never lost a bomber pilot, nor did they ever lose a bomber plane. And prior to the United States integrating its military in 1948, they made military history as our country's first and only all-African-American fighter pilot squadron. You may have heard them referred to as the Tuskegee Airmen, as they trained stateside for their assignment on the campuses of the Tuskegee University in the state of Alabama. Now, in a moment, on the driver's side, you're going to have a clearer view of a red stone gate. This is the McClellan Gate, and it was the first official entryway into Arlington National Cemetery. It opened in the 1870s. It is named after General George McClellan, who has the distinction, somewhat dubious though, of being hired twice by President Lincoln to lead the Union Army during the Civil War, because he was fired twice by President Lincoln for his leadership of the Union Army during the Civil War. Is our norm, and so right now we're just going to call into our dispatcher to let them know that we are at a standstill until we get some idea of whether it's just done or is a service that is about to. We are going to pass by the Memorial Amphitheater, where the tombs of the unknown soldiers are guarded 24 hours of the day, 365 days of the year, 7 days of the week, by the ceremonial unit of the 3rd Infantry, a combat infantry of the Army that has served continuously since it was established by General George Washington in 1784. And now, I invite you to get your cameras ready for a photo opportunity of the first tomb that was placed on the premises of the Memorial Amphitheater on Veterans Day in 1921. It is the only above-ground tomb, and it enshrines the soldier representing the unknown soldiers from World War I. In respect for the tomb, where silence is first and foremost the protocol of respect, I will go silent as we are in front of the tomb. And gentlemen, if you're comfortable in doing so, it is customary for you to remove your hats when we are in front of the tombs of the unknown soldiers. Now this is a photo opportunity.
That's the tomb.
In addition to seeing that first tomb, the only above-ground tomb or sarcophagus, you saw the steps that serve as the observation area for the changing of the guard ceremony. Again, that takes place every 30 minutes at the top and then again at the bottom of the hour. And all of our stops to drop you off as well as to pick you up are in the rear of the Memorial Amphitheater so that we do not disturb the peace of the tomb. What you're going to see when you're standing on the observation steps is that there are 3 below-ground tombs or crypts immediately on the other side of that one sarcophagus. At either end of that row of 3 below-ground tombs, the soldiers representing the unknown soldiers from World War II and the Korean War are laid to rest. And there is a middle tomb, below ground tomb, for the soldier representing the unknown soldiers from Vietnam. However, of the 4 tombs of the unknown soldiers, that middle below ground tomb is the only empty tomb, and per the Veterans Administration, at no time in history will any other soldier's remains replace those of the first and only soldier laid to rest in that middle below ground tomb on Memorial Day in 1984. As we leave General Pershing's burial site, making our way to your stop for the changing of the guard, I'll share the history as to why that one tomb is empty. But first, on the passenger side, this huge burial marker that you see is placed at the mass burial site for the USS Serpens ammunition ship, the Serpens. It was the Coast Guard's worst one-day catastrophe when that ship exploded and sank off of the coast of Guadalcanal during World War II. And now in Section 34, you're seeing a second type of government-issued burial markers. You'll note on the rectangular gray granite markers, there's a branch of the military etched at the top, and then there are several names listed below. These are group burial markers for our military that served together and then perished together during a catastrophe such as the sinking of a ship, a downing of a plane, an attack on a military installation or vehicle. And off in the distance, where you see a cluster of pine trees, you'll find the burial site of one of the Marines that raised that flag on top of Mount Suribachi on the island of Iwo Jima during World War II. Marine Corporal Ira Hayes from the Pima Nation of Native Americans. Johnny Cash wrote and performed a song about Corporal Ira Hayes, the Ballad of Ira Hayes. And as we approach the top of this hill, you're seeing a circle of mature evergreen trees. Within that circle, there's a clearing where there is a relatively young evergreen tree that in recent years has replaced the original World War I tree. On the right side of that memorial tree rests the highest ranking military officer in U.S. military history, 6-star General of the Army's John J. Blackjack Pershing. The only other burial marker near that tree on the left side is the burial site of 2 of his grandsons buried in the same burial site, both of whom served in Vietnam. One was killed in action. This is our stop for General Pershing in Section 34. If we have guests, oh, that feels so good. That breathes. If we have guests that wish to explore in Section 34, please raise your hand and I will let our driver, Mr. Eric, know to stand in place for your safe departure. If not, we'll continue on our way to the Memorial Amphitheater for the next changing of the guard. Very close to that memorial tree, as a matter of fact, the burial marking General Pershing's grandson are on the other side of the tree, but in front of General Pershing's burial marker is the final resting place of the last surviving World War I veteran. Corporal Frank Buckles was buried here at Arlington National Cemetery in 2011 at the tender age of 110 years old. Now, before I share the history of that one empty tomb, I do want to prepare you for entering the observation area where silence is first and foremost the protocol of reverence and respect at the tomb. So I always suggest to my guests that now is the perfect time to check your phones and other devices to ensure that they're set on silence or vibrate so that you will not be the one to disturb the peace of the tomb. Also, you are more than welcome to take as many pictures and video as long as you like, but flash photography is strictly prohibited. Now, the history of the empty tomb. 1975 was the last year of the United States involvement in the Vietnam War with the fall of the city of Saigon. By 1983, the U.S. military's identification center set up in Hawaii during the Vietnam War. By that year of 1983, there were less than 10 U.S. soldiers' remains that still could not be identified. And so the following year, on Memorial Day in 1984, one of those soldiers was laid to rest in that middle below-ground tomb to begin his tour of duty representing those unknown Vietnam soldiers. Now fast forward to 1998, the year in which the U.S. Congress passed the DNA Identification Act, and what that allowed for was for all government agencies and all matters, legal and otherwise, to officially accept the results of DNA tests as the technology had been able to consistently achieve 99.7% accuracy. With that act passed, the military was now free to reopen the investigation to identify those Vietnam soldiers using the approved DNA test and technology. And when that was done, the soldier who had been laid to rest in that middle below ground crypt became known as U.S. Air Force Captain Michael Blase. His family wanted him home, and so he was reinterred he was reinterred in the Jefferson Barracks Military Cemetery outside of St. Louis in Captain Blase's home state of Missouri. And the declaration that there will never be another soldier's remains from any other military engagement honors Captain Blase's tour of duty representing those unknown Vietnam soldiers for well over a decade. On the driver's side, on the top of the hill, coming into your view, you see 4 cannons that were used in the Spanish-American War. The smaller cannons were used by the Spanish Armada, having a range of 400 yards. The larger cannons used by the U.S. Navy had a range of 14 miles. So it is no coincidence that the Spanish-American War remains among the briefest military engagements in U.S. military history. Continuing on the driver's side, coming into your view is the only tree that has a paved path around it. Behind that tree, you'll find the final resting place of Major Audie Murphy, the most highly decorated enlisted man during World War II. He went on to have a career in the motion pictures. Now, ladies, you cannot reboard here. You'll reboard on the sidewalk, but where you see those people lined up on, so now you know that. And you'll take the curved path closest to the building where you see our guests walking towards us. You'll walk in the opposite direction, staying on the ground level until you return to the front of the Memorial Amphitheater where you saw that one above ground tube. There are restrooms in the lower level of the building, and at the top of the observation steps, there is an exhibit hall that has wonderful artifacts and is usually very comfortably air conditioned. We're going to make a left turn and coming into better view. As you look on the driver's side, after we make this turn, you'll have a better view of the tallest structure in this area. You're looking at the actual rear mass of the USS Maine warship. It was sent to the harbor of Havana, Cuba in 1898 to protect U.S. citizens and U.S. property on the island of Cuba during an uprising. To this day, there are some historians that are still debating what or even who was responsible for the explosion that sank the Maine in the harbor of Havana. But what is not disputed is the fact that when the USS Maine exploded and sank in the harbor of Havana, it brought the United States into the Spanish-American War. The war motto was, "Remember the Maine." On the passenger side, we're now traveling by the largest intact burial section on the premises of Arlington. This is section 13. And while it is not the very first section where Civil War soldiers were laid to rest, the year on this property, the year before the Civil War ended in 1865, it is the section where you'll find the majority of the more than 16,000 Civil War soldiers buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Additionally, there are military buried in this section that served in at least one of each military engagement between the Civil War up to and through the end of the Korean War, which ended in 1953. So if you were to explore on your own in Section 13, you would observe a span of military history of almost 100 years. On the driver's side, on the other side of that stone wall and fence, is the location of the only joint base in the U.S. military system shared between the Army and the Marines. This is Fort Myers Henderson Hall. And in addition to the military service members that are stationed at the joint base, each of the main elements of an honors military burial service conducted on the premises of Arlington can be found on the grounds and under the authority of Fort Myers Henderson Hall. Arlington is the only U.S. military cemetery that still employs the use of the caisson or wagon that bears the remains of those that are laid to rest on the grounds of this cemetery. And the horses that draw the caisson are on the grounds of the joint base as well as the caissons. When he was only 6 months of age, his father had died during the Revolutionary War, and so he was raised by his grandmother and his grandmother's second husband, President George Washington. Prior to her marriage to the first president of the United States, at the age of 16, Martha had been married to and then widowed by a wealthy landowner by the name of Daniel Custis that owned several slave plantations in the state of Virginia. When her grandson came of age and married, he had one child that survived to adulthood with his wife, a daughter, Mariana Randolph Custis, who inherited this plantation upon her father's death. Mariana's husband served as the executor of his father-in-law's estate, and she was married to Robert E. Lee. The Lees lived on the premises of Arlington for more than 30 years, until the beginning of the Civil War, when Colonel Lee, by that time, resigned his commission from the U.S. military to serve in opposition to the U.S. government as an officer in the Confederate Army. With his resignation submitted in the Arlington House, the Lee family left Arlington, Virginia, where we are now, and made their way to the capital city of Virginia, Richmond, also the capital of the Confederacy, as it existed during the Civil War. This is our stop for the Arlington House, and we are the next to the last vehicle that will get you here before the self-guided tour is closed down by the National Park Service. So, if you would like to take that tour, I strongly suggest that you get off now, as a later vehicle will be bringing you here, cutting it close. It's also beautiful. You could stay here forever. They are the days on which we have burial services conducted on the premises, and so in the morning, 30 minutes before the very first burial service takes place, the flag is lowered from its full staff position to its half-staff position. When you see that flag has again been placed in its full staff position, you'll know that each of the 26 burial services scheduled for today have completed. Passenger side, behind those tall hedges, is the first tomb of the unknown soldiers placed on the premises. The tomb of the Civil War unknown soldiers, where 2,111 Civil War soldiers from both sides of that war are laid to rest beneath and around a tomb that is the largest mass burial on the premises of Arlington National Cemetery. As many of you know, we lost more American lives during the American Civil War than if you were to add up all of the American lives lost in all of the American military engagements from the Revolutionary War through World War I. Now, where the flagpole is situated in front of the Arlington House is the point where President Kennedy stood when he visited Arlington National Cemetery 8 months before the president was assassinated in Dallas, Texas in November of 1963. He was visiting Arlington because his daughter's elementary school class was on a field trip here, and when the president and Caroline's classmates stepped out on the front of the Arlington House, which, by the way, is built on the highest natural point within less than a quarter of a mile from the headquarters of each of the three branches of our federal government, in addition to where the National Mall is with all of its monuments, memorials, and museums. And the president commented that the view was so beautiful, he could stay here forever. 8 months later, after the president's assassination in Dallas, the comment was shared with his widow, Jacqueline, and she thought it only fitting that her husband's burial site is positioned in the line of sight of the view that had inspired him so. By custom, presidents are buried in their home state. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we see another caisson unit. Most of the funeral services for those that are laid to rest here have taken place weeks, sometimes months earlier. As a matter of fact, there's still a waiting time between when you find out that your eligibility to be laid to rest here has been confirmed and when they can actually bury you here. But we do have some funeral services that are conducted on the grounds of the Joint Base in the Post Chapel. So I think I was saying that most presidents are buried in their home state because that is where their presidential libraries are built. President Kennedy was the second of the two presidents that are laid to rest here. As we complete this final right turn and we're on the straight way back to the Welcome Center, at the top of the hill on the passenger side, you'll see a tall brown obelisk marking the burial site of the first president that was laid to rest here at Arlington in March of 1930. He not only served as our 27th president, he also served as our 10th Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Coming into your view at the top of the hill, the obelisk marking President William Howard Taft's final resting place.
Weighing 230 pounds.
Now, President Taft is laid to rest with his wife, Helen, who in the year 1912, along with the wife of the Japanese ambassador at the time, those two women were responsible for the planting of more than 3,000 cherry blossom trees that bloom around the tidal basin and in park areas managed by the National Park Service in the city of Washington, D.C. If you've ever been in Washington during the bloom time of those cherry blossoms, you know that Washington goes gaga over the cherry blossom trees. We have cherry blossom concerts, we have cherry blossom parades, we have cherry blossom festivals, and during that time there are foods and beverages infused with the flavor of cherry that just boggle the imagination. And I can't let you leave our tour without you knowing that President Taft also has a place in sports history. The year was 1910 when President Taft attended a baseball game in Washington between the Washington Senators and the Philadelphia Athletics. President Taft was not intending to leave the game when he initially stood up after the top of the seventh inning had ended, but before the bottom of that inning began. We imagine that President Taft got very comfortable in the stadium seats, as in presidential history, after the top of the seventh inning had ended, but before the ninth, before the bottom of that inning began, and when he stood up, everybody in the stadium stood up, because that's the proper protocol. If you're in the presence of the president and the president stands up, the protocol requires you to stand up as well. So it was at a baseball game in 1910 when our 27th president, 10th Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, began the American baseball tradition of the seventh inning stretch. Meet me on the sidewalk. We have mementos of your distributed here at the nation's U.S. military cemetery. It is distributed every day.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.